My name is Franklin Moore. Folks call me Frank. I'm 62 years old, a retired steel worker from Johnstown, Pennsylvania. For 3 decades, every Thanksgiving of my life has been spent at the same oak table in my house. The one I built with my own hands, planed smooth in the garage back when my wife Marlene was still alive, to sand the corners and stitch the first tablecloth. That table has seen turkeys bigger than the oven could handle, cranberry sauce made from her mother's recipe, and the laughter of neighbors who never had anywhere else to go. Thanksgiving wasn't just a holiday in our family. It was our covenant. This year, the air felt different. As I rubbed sage into the cavity of the bird and set the oven to preheat, I noticed my son Brian avoided eye contact. He'd stopped by that morning, standing stiff in the doorway, offering only a quick, "Don't wear yourself out, Dad." When I asked if he and his wife Karen were bringing the grandkids over early like usual, his answer came too fast. "We'll see. Things might be different this year." Different. The word stuck in my ears like a splinter. Later that afternoon, as I polished the silverware, I caught a glimpse of Karen across the street, her phone pressed to her ear. Her lips curled into a smile that wasn't meant for me. She laughed, then glanced toward my house, shaking her head like it was some private joke. I set the fork down, my chest tight. Something was coming. I could feel it in my bones. The kind of shift you sense before a storm breaks. The oven dinged, the bird ready to slide in. For the first time in 30 years, I wondered if the table I'd guarded like an altar might sit empty on Thanksgiving night. The next morning, I carried a basket of apples to Brian's porch, hoping to break the ice. Karen's SUV was in the driveway, engine still warm. Out. I heard her voice before I even knocked, sharp, hurried, and laced with triumph. "Don't let him show up. We'll host Thanksgiving here, cleaner, brighter. No one wants to sit in that drafty old house with his gloom hanging over the place." I froze, my knuckles inches from the door. Her voice softened. "Yes, the realtor's lined up. Once we get him to sign, the house is ours to sell. Brian doesn't have the backbone to tell him yet, but I'll push it through. By Christmas, it'll be done." My chest went cold. My house, Marlene's table, sold like a used car while I was still breathing. The door creaked open suddenly, and Karen nearly collided with me. Her smile faltered, then slid back into place. "Frank, what a surprise." I forced my voice steady. "Brought apples. Thought the kids might like them." She took the basket without meeting my eyes. "How thoughtful. But you really shouldn't wear yourself out. We've got things handled this year." I glanced past her. On the kitchen counter sat a stack of glossy invitations. Thanksgiving dinner at the Patterson home. My son's name, Karen's flourish, no mention of me. Karen followed my gaze, her smirk returning. "We just want everyone comfortable, Frank. Times change. People want Wi-Fi, space, modern touches. You understand." I swallowed hard. I understand plenty. Walking back across the yard, the apples felt heavier without my hands on them. My stomach churned, but under the sickness, a slow fire lit. They thought they could erase me with invitations and realtors. They thought tradition ended because Karen declared it so. I closed my door behind me, the smell of sage and roasting turkey filling the kitchen. "This," I whispered to the empty house, "is just the beginning." That evening, I walked across the street again, this time without apples or pretense. Brian was raking leaves by the curb, earbuds dangling, his posture stiff when he saw me. "Dad," he said, cautious. "Everything okay?" I didn't waste time. Why is Karen telling people Thanksgiving is at your place? Why are there invitations with your names on them? His face went pale. The rake stilled mid-sweep. You heard that? I heard enough. The door opened behind him. Karen stepped out, arms crossed like a gatekeeper. Frank, we were going to talk to you about it. Talk, I said. You were going to spring it on me like a surprise eviction. 30 years I've hosted this holiday. 30 years at that table your mother polished with her own hands. Brian glanced at Karen, then back at me. Dad, it's not like that. We just thought... Karen cut him off. We thought it's time for a change. The family deserves comfort. Modern amenities. People don't want to cram into that old house anymore. I stared at my son. Is that what you think too? He hesitated. Silence stretched long enough for the leaves to rustle across the curb. Finally, he muttered, maybe it is time. The words landed harder than a hammer. Karen smirked, sensing victory. See, Frank? Even Brian agrees. It's better this way. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. And what about the house? Realtors lined up, papers ready. Was that part of the better way too? Brian's eyes snapped wide. Karen's smirk cracked, but only for a second. You're imagining things, she said quickly. Am I? I asked, holding his gaze, because I remember every nail in that house, every Thanksgiving, every promise. You think I'll just sit quiet while you erase me? Neither of them answered. Karen pulled Brian toward the porch. He let her. As the door shut between us, one question hung heavy in the November air, unspoken but sharp enough to cut. Who really owns Thanksgiving in this family? Me, or the people trying to bury me alive? 2 days later, I was stacking firewood behind the shed when my neighbor, Wallace Dunn, shuffled over. Wallace was retired postal clerk, 70, with a sharp eye for things most folks missed. He carried an envelope in his hand. Frank, he said quietly, you better see this. Found it mixed with my mail by mistake. Guess the carrier's new and doesn't know the houses yet. He handed it over. My name wasn't on it, but Brian's was. And the return address? A local realty office. My gut tightened. Inside were crisp papers, thick with legal language. Exclusive right-to-sell agreement. Property address, my home. Listed owner, Brian Moore. But it wasn't his name on the original deed. It was mine and Marlene's. My wife's memory, still written in ink. I stared at the papers until the lines blurred. Wallace put a hand on my shoulder. You didn't sign this, did you? Not a chance, I muttered, anger creeping into my throat. Then he forged you, Wallace said. Or plans to. I carried the envelope inside, laying it on the kitchen table. The smell of sage and turkey seasoning from the pantry mocked me, tradition fighting against betrayal. That evening, I walked past Brian's house and saw through the window. Karen at the dining table, laptop open, scrolling through listings. She clicked one, smiled, and kissed Brian's cheek. I stepped back into the shadows. The realization cut deep. They weren't just taking Thanksgiving. They were gutting my life's work, the house where Marlene and I built every memory worth keeping. Later, Wallace came by with coffee. You can't let this slide, Frank. You still got options. Hell, half the town knows that house is yours. They can't erase 3 decades with a pen. I sipped the bitter brew, my hands steadying. They think I'm too old, too tired to fight. Wallace leaned back. Then you show them the old steelworker's still got iron in his blood. The envelope sat between us, heavy as an anvil. For the first time, I understood the betrayal wasn't just Karen's cruelty. It was Brian's silence. And silence, I knew, could kill a man's name faster than fire ever could. The night before Thanksgiving, the house felt colder than usual. I'd kept the fire low, saving wood, though truth was, I didn't have the stomach for warmth. The oak table sat bare, no tablecloth, no silver, no laughter waiting to fill the chairs. I heated leftovers, dry chicken and potatoes, from 2 nights ago. Ate standing at the counter because sitting at that wide, empty table cut too deep. Every swallow felt like gravel. Through the window I could see Brian's house across the street, lit up bright as a carnival. Cars lined the curb, cousins and in-laws arriving early. Karen's voice carried across the yard when she opened the door to greet someone. "Welcome to our Thanksgiving. You'll be so comfortable here." Our Thanksgiving. The words gnawed at me. I walked into the living room, flipped through old photo albums. Marlene smiling, apron dusted with flour. Brian as a boy carving turkey for the first time. His hands too small for the knife. Neighbors crowding around a table that always had room for one more. I closed the album fast. The memories, once a comfort, now pressed down like stones. The clock ticked past 9. Fireworks from the town square cracked in the distance, little bursts of color celebrating the holiday. Alone in my darkened kitchen, I couldn't muster even a flicker of pride. For the first time since Marlene passed, I wondered if I was already a ghost in my own life. Someone tolerated, not wanted. A relic. The phone rang once. I rushed to answer, heart thumping, thinking maybe Brian had changed his mind. But it was a robocall wishing me a happy Thanksgiving savings event. I hung up without a word. Back at the counter, my plate sat half full. The chicken had gone cold. I forced down one last bite, the taste of loneliness sharper than any spice. For the first time in 30 years, I went to bed on Thanksgiving Eve without setting the table. And that, more than anything, made me feel the holiday had already been stolen. I woke before dawn, the house still wrapped in shadows. My throat was dry, my head heavy, but something tugged me toward the attic. Maybe it was memory. Maybe it was Marlene's voice, faint as a whisper on the wind. The ladder groaned under my weight. I pulled the chain, and the single bulb flickered to life. Dust drifted in the beam like tiny sparks. There in the corner sat the cedar chest Marlene had guarded like treasure. I hadn't opened it since the funeral. My fingers hesitated on the brass latch, then pressed down. The lid creaked, and the smell of lavender sachets filled the air. Inside, her recipe cards, folded linens, and at the bottom, an envelope thick with documents. My name, her handwriting. I slid them out and spread them across the trunk. Bank records, tax receipts. And then the gem, a notarized copy of our joint property deed tucked beside Marlene's will. Clear as daylight, it spelled out what I already knew. The house could not be sold without consent of both spouses' estates. And her estate? Never probated. Brian hadn't just betrayed me. He'd ignored his mother's final word. I sank onto the attic floor, papers trembling in my hands. It wasn't just proof. It was her voice carried forward in ink, telling me, "Don't let them erase us." I dug deeper and found something else. A small leather-bound notebook. Marlene's handwriting filled its pages. Lists of who had borrowed what, who had been helped when, each signed off in her neat cursive. Names of neighbors, friends, even Wallace. A mirror to my own ledgers. Tears stung my eyes. The two of us had been keeping the same kind of record all along, separate but together. By the time I climbed down from the attic, dawn had broken. The sky streaked orange and gray. My chest felt lighter than it had in weeks. I placed Marlene's will and the deed copy on the oak table, smoothing the pages flat. The fire inside me caught spark. They thought I was finished. They thought my silence meant surrender. But I still had her, in ink and memory, and with her, I had the strength to fight. Wallace showed up that afternoon carrying 2 thermoses of coffee. He took one look at the papers spread across my oak table and whistled low. "Well, I'll be damned. You've got the deed, the will, and her notes. That's more than enough to punch holes in Brian's scheme." I slid the notebook toward him. Marlene kept her own ledger. Names, dates, signatures. It lines up with mine. That's 2 sets of records they can't explain away. He nodded, sipping his coffee. "So what's the move?" I leaned forward. "Step 1, gather allies. You, Clara Hayes from the sheriff's office. Anyone who remembers these debts and payments. Step 2, copy everything. No one gets to torch this proof again. Step 3, confront them, publicly, not in whispers, at their own damn table tomorrow." Wallace's eyebrows rose. "You're thinking of walking into Karen's Thanksgiving circus?" "I'm thinking of ending it there, in front of everyone they tried to fool." He chuckled. "Dangerous, bold. Sounds like Marlene's kind of plan." I set the deed copy aside and tapped the recorder on the table. "What?" "I'll wear this. Let Brian speak his arrogance again. He can't help himself. Once he admits it, the room will hear. No running from that." Wallace grinned, a spark of mischief in his old eyes. "Then what?" "Then I lay the papers down, play the tape, and remind them all who built this tradition, who this house really belongs to. No more shadows, no more silence." The room grew still, the fire crackling low. For the first time, I saw a path clear as a steel rail. Wallace raised his thermos in a toast. "To tomorrow, then. To a reckoning." I clinked mine against his, the bitter coffee warming my throat. Tomorrow, the table they tried to steal would become the very stage of their undoing. Early Thanksgiving morning, while Karen's house bustled with borrowed folding chairs and store-bought pies, I drove Wallace's truck into town. The streets were quiet. Most shops shuttered. But the copy center by the courthouse had its lights on. "Morning, Frank," said the clerk, a kid with ink-stained fingers. "Didn't expect to see you on a holiday." "Got some family records to back up," I replied. He ran the machine while I fed in Marlene's will, the deed copies, and pages from her notebook. The copier hummed steady, spitting out crisp, date-stamped replicas. I asked for duplicates, then duplicates of those, layer after layer, until I had 3 thick folders. Physical evidence #1. "Going somewhere?" the kid asked, curious. "Just making sure history doesn't go up in smoke again," I said. Next stop was Wallace's place. In his garage, I slipped fresh batteries into my old tape recorder, pressed the red button, and spoke. "Test 1, 2. The playback came out scratchy but clear, reliable. Wallace handed me a manila envelope. "Keep one set with me. One with Clara. That way, even if Brian tries something, you're covered." By noon, I was back home, folders spread across the oak table like a general preparing for war. The smell of roasting turkey still lingered from last night's attempt at normalcy. This time, it smelled less like failure and more like defiance. I tucked the recorder into my shirt pocket, slipped the deed and Marlene's notebook into my coat, and packed the extra folders in Wallace's truck. My reflection in the hallway mirror startled me, jaw tight, eyes steady. Not the broken man from 2 nights ago. "They think I'm forgotten," I muttered, "but today I'm remembered." Wallace honked outside, ready to drive us straight into the lion's den. The plan was set, the proof was copied, and in just a few hours, the Thanksgiving table would become the stage for truth they couldn't burn. By mid-afternoon, Karen's house glowed like a showroom. Cars lined the street, kids ran through the yard, and the smell of turkey drifted out the open windows. I walked in with Wallace at my side, coat buttoned over the folders and recorder humming in my pocket. Conversation died the moment I crossed the threshold. Karen pasted on her hostess smile. "Frank, you weren't supposed to trouble yourself. We've got everything handled here." I scanned the room. Cousins, in-laws, neighbors, all seated at folding tables draped in shiny new linens. At the head sat Brian, carving knife poised over a bird he hadn't cooked. "Handled?" I asked. "That what you call stealing?" A ripple of gasps. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Now's not the time." "It's exactly the time." I strode to the main table, pulled the certified deed from my coat, and laid it flat beside the turkey platter. "This house across the street, the one you're trying to sell, still bears Marlene's name. It isn't yours to give away." Brian's face flushed. "Dad, don't do this here." I ignored him, sliding out Marlene's notebook. "And these? Records in her hand. Neighbors' signatures, debts settled, promises honored. Proof that our family's word meant something once." Karen gave a brittle laugh. "Old scraps. Who cares?" I reached into my pocket and pressed the recorder. Brian's voice spilled out, clear and sharp. "Of course I forged his name. The ledger was pathetic. The money's mine now, all of it." The room went silent. Forks froze mid-air. Eyes turned on Brian like floodlights. My son lunged forward. "He's twisting things." "Am I?" I shot back. "Or did you forget how easy the truth plays when you brag?" Karen stammered. He's confused. You all know Frank's memory isn't—" "Enough!" I thundered. "For 30 years, I've opened my table to every soul who needed it. And this is how you repay me? By burning records, forging signatures, selling what isn't yours." The murmurs grew louder. Neighbors whispering, cousins shaking their heads. Wallace stepped closer, his voice carrying, "I signed that ledger myself. I'll swear to it in court." Brian's knife clattered onto the platter. He looked around, realizing the tide had turned. I leaned across the table, steady and cold. "The truth is here, Brian, and it's not leaving with you." Karen's mask cracked. Her hostess' smile twisted into a sneer as she rose from her chair, voice slicing through the murmurs. "You all don't see it, do you? He's lost it. Frank's a bitter old man clinging to paper scraps because he can't stand that time passed him by. He's lived alone so long he thinks numbers love him more than people do." A few cousins shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Brian seized the opening, pounding the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. "He's humiliating us in our own home. Dad, you're finished here. This family's moving forward without you." I stood my ground, the recorder still warm in my palm. Moving forward by lying, by stealing, that's no future worth having. Karen jabbed a finger at me. "You think anyone's going to side with you over us? Look around. You're outnumbered, outdated. You'll die bitter and alone, clutching your little notebooks like they matter." Her words hung heavy. Even Laura, my granddaughter, stared down at her lap, cheeks red with shame. And then a new voice cut through the tension. "Not alone." Deputy Clara Hayes stepped into the room, uniform neat, badge catching the overhead light. Gasps rippled as she walked toward the table. "Mr. Moore isn't crazy. He's the victim of fraud, and I've got evidence to prove it." Karen stiffened. "What are you doing here?" Clara held up a folder of photographs. Security footage from the bank. Brian Moore, signing withdrawals under his father's name. Clear as day. And that, folks, is a felony. The room erupted. Neighbors whispered, some outright glaring at Brian now. Wallace nodded firmly from the back. Told you the truth would stand. Brian stammered, You can't arrest me over some blurry pictures. Clara's voice stayed calm, sharp as steel. Combined with the recording and notarized deed, it's more than enough to open a case. And if you think a courtroom will treat your father like a fool, think again. Judges don't dismiss hard evidence. Karen's face flushed deep red. This is a family matter. No, Clara cut in, eyes locked on her. This is fraud, and it stops now. Brian slumped into his chair, sweat beading at his temple. The turkey knife still lay abandoned before him, useless against truth. For the first time all evening, the tide had shifted. The room was buzzing like a kicked hornet's nest. Neighbors murmuring, relatives whispering, sharp enough for Brian and Karen to hear every word. My son looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, shoulders slumped, eyes darting for an escape that wasn't there. I reached into my coat one last time and laid a sealed envelope on the table. The seal bore Marlene's careful handwriting. Gasps filled the room as I opened it and slid out the yellowed pages. This, I said, my voice steady, is your mother's will, dated, notarized, and witnessed. She left explicit instructions that this house, this land, and the table in that dining room across the street remain with me until my death. Only then would it pass, equally, between her children. Equally. Not to be sold, not to be stripped. Karen's face went pale. That can't be real. Clara stepped closer, reading the document over my shoulder. It's real. I recognize the notary stamp. That's binding. I flipped to the second page, Marlene's signature flowing bold as the day she signed it. She trusted that her family would honor her words. Instead, I locked eyes with Brian. You tried to burn her memory with my ledger, but you forgot her voice was preserved here, stronger than flame. Brian's jaw worked soundlessly. Karen sputtered. He's waving old paper around. Old paper! Wallace barked from the back. I signed as a witness. That's my handwriting beside Marlene's. You want to call me a liar too? The crowd shifted. Relatives who'd been silent now muttered angrily. One cousin stood up. So you tried to sell Frank's house while telling us he was losing his mind. You both disgust me. Karen's hand shook as she gripped Brian's arm. We can fight this. Courts make mistakes. Clara shook her head. Not with this combination. Fraudulent withdrawals, recorded confession, notarized will. This isn't a family squabble anymore. This is a case. Brian sagged, his face hollow. For years I'd seen him as my boy, flawed but still my blood. Tonight, all I saw was a man who had betrayed everything Marlene and I built. I closed the will, laid it on the pile of evidence and said, Your mother's voice has the final word. And she just spoke. The room erupted, half in outrage at Brian and Karen, half in relief that truth had finally landed. The tide wasn't just turning. It had swept them clean off their feet. The room had shifted into a courtroom, every fork and glass forgotten as eyes bore down on Brian and Karen. The pile of evidence sat between us. Deed copies, Marlene's will, the charred notebook, the recorder still humming faintly. Karen's voice cracked first. You all can't honestly believe this circus. He's manipulating you with papers no one's seen before today. Clara stepped forward, badge glinting. Mrs. Moore, you're welcome to explain that to a judge. But I'll warn you, the county prosecutor doesn't look kindly on forged signatures and bank fraud. Brian slammed his fist against the table, rattling the turkey platter. Enough! This is my family, my house, Not yours, I cut in, steady as steel. I pulled the recorder from my pocket and pressed play one final time. His voice filled the room. Of course I forged his name. The money's mine now, all of it. Gasps. Someone muttered. He admitted it himself. Brian lunged, snatching for the recorder, but Wallace caught his arm halfway. The old postman still had surprising strength. Not today, boy, he growled. Clara's partner moved in, cuffs flashing. Brian's bravado cracked, his voice rising in panic. You can't do this. It's Thanksgiving. No, I said, my voice carrying over the chaos. It's Judgment Day, and you brought it on yourself. Karen tried one last stand. He's your son, Frank. You'd really let them drag him off like a criminal? I met her eyes coldly. I didn't let him. He did this himself. To me, to Marlene's memory, to everyone who trusted us. He made his choice. The cuffs clicked shut. Brian's shoulders sagged, sweat beating down his temples. Clara signaled her partner, and together they guided him toward the door. Karen followed, sputtering, but no one rose to defend her. Not one. As the door closed, silence settled. Then, slowly, hands began to clap. Wallace first, then a cousin, then half the room. Not applause for me, but for the truth that had stood tall when lies tried to bury it. I looked around the table, at faces that had once doubted me, now seeing me clearly. My voice softened. This table isn't just wood. It's 30 years of family, of promises. They tried to take it, to sell it for scraps. But tonight, we proved some things aren't for sale. I laid Marlene's will back on the stack and rested my hand on it. Not her memory, not my name, not this home. The turkey sat untouched, but for the first time in weeks, I felt full. The morning after Thanksgiving, the house felt lighter. Sunlight streamed across the oak table, glinting off Marlene's old tablecloth I'd finally laid out again. Wallace stopped by with a pumpkin pie, and later Clara dropped in to check on me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like a man who'd held his ground. Brian and Karen faced charges, their names whispered with shame instead of respect. But I didn't linger on that. Instead, I cooked a smaller meal that weekend, invited only those who truly wanted to be here. Laura sat beside me, holding my hand as we bowed our heads. "Grandpa," she whispered, "this feels like Thanksgiving again." And it was. Because Thanksgiving isn't about flashy houses or realtors' contracts. It's about remembering, about keeping faith with those who built before us. They tried to erase me, but in the end, I chose to stand, and I chose to stay. CTA, if you've listened this far, thank you. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Stories Men U60 USA, because stories like mine deserve to be heard.